Good morning and welcome back. Thanks for joining us this Sunday morning. I do hope your week was as good as the weather as we now enter the last week of spring. Today, I want to talk about something rarely discussed in public, the realities of death in 2020. In the last few months, more thought has probably been given to dying than at any other time in my life. Daily updating on who is sick and who has died. Heartbreaking stories and photos of the isolated and the elderly, unable to be with those they love. Aircraft of our military falling from the skies. Funerals deferred. Suicides and overdoses up. Mass murder, and then the killing of George Floyd. The shooting of Chantel Moore. The fall from a balcony by Regis Karczynski-Paquette. And the protests, deaths, and civil disobedience that followed. Death has ceased to be a remote issue to be dealt with in one's old age, but a frightening daily occurrence to the young as well as the old. And how ill-equipped we are as a society to deal with the whole subject. Having spent the last dozen years as an intensive care unit chaplain, and having grown up with a family whose dead were laid out in the living room, I am familiar with death and regard it as a friend who whisks us home at the end of this life. My mother clearly anticipated the angel Gabriel arriving in his chariot. After she had a stroke at the age of 97, she bemoaned the fact that he had come for her, but she, having pushed the button that brings the paramedics, had upset the apple cart. And her name was off the list, and she was stuck here forever. Years of seminary and Bible study meant nothing. She told me of her sorry fate every time I saw her for the next 5 years, until Gabriel finally remembered and got around to making the pickup. This isn't to make light of death and dying, but the reality is that we all come with an expiry date. No one gets out of this world alive. In other times and places, death was a very different reality. As recently as 100 years ago, most babies were born at home, and many did not survive the first 5 years. Hospitals were a place to be avoided if at all possible. You were born and died at home. The first in your mother's bed, and the latter in your own. Victorian literature is just full of deathbed scenes, some full of hymn-singing friends and family, rejoicing at the opening of heaven's gates. Others saw friends chatting beside the about-to-be-departed consumptive and catching it themselves. My great-grandmother had 3 sons die of TB from nursing their siblings, and it only stopped with the last of them. Death was familiar and frequent. Bodies were washed and dressed by the family, then laid out in the parlor. Black wreaths adorned the front door. Clocks were stopped and their faces covered. Women wore black, men wore black armbands, and the community accompanied the body to the church for the funeral service, and then walking behind the horse-drawn hearse, which necessitated all traffic stop out of respect for the dead en route to the cemetery, where the body would finally be committed to their loving God. How times have changed. In the 21st century, people are expected to be born in the hospital with the assistance of professionals and to eventually die in the hospital, unless they are among the fortunate, and some would say inconsiderate few, who fell asleep in their own bed and awoke in heaven. I imagine to the great upset of the one with whom they slept. The first call made is to the funeral director to come for the body, to prepare and dress and add the makeup and set the hair. The coffin is purchased, not crafted by a friend, and the funeral home sets the visiting hours and sends out the obit, so friends will know when to appear. If there is a minister to conduct the service, odds are she doesn't know the deceased, for the role for the clergy at the funeral home service has become that of an MC, who ensures that there will be eulogies, a prayer or two, and some music. More and more families are choosing to merely have the body removed from the hospital and donated for science, or go directly to be cremated. The religious trappings of church and clergy are no longer seen as necessary. For, after all, who really knows what happens after death, they reason. Is there something or nothing? And if something, who presumes to know what? Instead, a social gathering, a memorial service, will be held at the Legion or by the lake at their favorite camping ground or in the local pub. It's a time to tell stories and weep and laugh and eat and drink, much like an old-time wake. Why, someone might even drop in a prayer. But these inevitabilities are things most people do not discuss or plan. Indeed, it's almost as if death was contagious and ignoring it a form of protection. Widows complain that old friends no longer invite them to dinner. Is it because one now makes an odd number at the table? Or because they want to talk about their loneliness and their fears, their empty house? And hovering over them is the reality of loss and death. If we don't talk about it, maybe it just won't happen. In a time when most people were churchgoers, there was a mutual understanding of what one might expect of the afterlife. Now, with 2 generations of declining church attendance, a growth in humanism and atheism and agnosticism, particularly among the young, there's no longer a sense that what I believe is believed by you. And so, what to say, what to believe, and how to share in the whole process of mourning without feeling like a hypocrite. I don't have the answer to that. With our own beliefs, we try to be sensitive to others' beliefs, or lack thereof, and end up tongue-tied. With only questions and not faith, whatever is said sounds more like a query rather than empathy. I just know that what was already challenging has become almost impossible in the times of COVID and senseless murder and death. When one is not able to reach out and be able to be held and to hold, when friends cannot gather to share in their deep-felt grief, when protest is the overwhelming emotion of so many, protest at isolation, protest at hypocritical politicians, protest at the loss of meaning and order in one's life, protest at violent death, at the death of loved ones, at fear of their own death, at protest of losing those they love and the life they had. The feeling of helplessness is overwhelming and is magnified when coupled with the guilt of seeing wrongs and examining one's own failures. Yet, that can be a good thing if it results in positive change, identifying, atoning, changing, fixing, always with the goal of loving one's neighbor, and everyone is a neighbor, loving them as oneself, wanting the best for others, and working hard to make sure there is a better world for each generation. That must be our objective. When each of us is on our deathbed, it's my fondest hope that you will be able to look back over your life, acknowledging failures with regret, but able to believe that on the whole, the world is a better place because you too were a part of it. And that is what the Christian life is all about. And that is what the life and death of Jesus was all about. Forgiveness for all eternity. Do not fear death. It's just one step on the journey. There is so much yet to come. As to the reality of death, I leave the last word on the subject to the early 20th century Episcopal Bishop, Charles Brent, who described it far better than I can in these words. What is dying? I'm standing on the seashore, A ship sails to the morning breeze and starts for the ocean. She's an object, and I stand watching her till at last she fades from the horizon. And someone at my side says, "She's gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that's all. She's just as large in the masts, the hull and spars as she was when I saw her, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to its destination. The diminished size and total loss of sight is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone at my side says, "She is gone," there are others who are watching her coming, and other voices take up a glad shout, "There she comes!" And that is dying. Well, don't forget to worship online. There are so many superb offerings. In the Toronto Diocese alone, there are dozens and dozens. Check them out. Thank you for joining me again, and may God bless you and yours until we meet in the real world or on this line, hopefully next Sunday.